Welcome to the Unveiled Epoch Echoes channel. Today, we're diving deep into an unexplored historical mystery. It began with a photograph that no one remembered taking, a sepia-toned image discovered in the quiet archives of a shuttered Midwestern newspaper building, where dust hung in the air like patient snow, and the ticking of an old wall clock echoed through hallways that had not known footsteps in years. And the photograph showed a city street that seemed entirely ordinary at first glance, with its tidy brick storefronts, polished automobiles, and men in dark wool coats tipping their hats beneath a sky the color of brushed silver. Yet something in the stillness of the image carried a strange and almost imperceptible unease, because though the calendar visible in the shop window behind the crowd clearly read April of 1928, the expressions on the faces of the people were not those of spring optimism, but of a deep and silent dread, as if they were watching something unfold beyond the frame of the camera. And in the reflection of the glass, one could just make out a line of men stretching into the distance, their shoulders slumped, their hands buried in empty pockets, while the buildings behind them appeared to sag, as though time itself had grown heavy and tired of holding them upright. And it was this small detail that caught the attention of Samuel Wren, an archivist whose lifelong devotion to forgotten corners of American history had led him to catalog the remnants of lost publications. Because Samuel had grown up listening to his grandfather speak in hushed tones about the days before the markets fell, when confidence had flowed like honeyed light through the veins of every town, and promise had seemed as endless as the horizon. And he remembered the way the old man's voice would falter when describing the sudden silence that followed the crash, as though the world had drawn a breath it could never quite release. And so when Samuel examined the photograph beneath the soft amber glow of his desk lamp, he felt an inexplicable pull, as if the image were less a record of the past than a window into something that had not yet happened. For upon closer inspection, he noticed that the automobiles in the foreground bore license plates that would not be issued until years later, and that the architecture of one distant building resembled a bank known to have been constructed only after the economic collapse. And yet there it stood in perfect clarity within an image dated more than a year before the downturn began. And the longer he looked, the more the photograph seemed to change, with shadows gathering at the edges like approaching storm clouds, while the faces in the crowd took on a gauntness that felt impossible for a moment captured in prosperity. And at night, as Samuel lay in bed listening to the distant hum of trains crossing the plains, he found himself imagining the unseen photographer standing at that corner, knowing somehow what was coming and pressing the shutter not to preserve the present, but to warn the future. And his search for answers led him to the basement of a long-abandoned historical society, where the scent of old paper and varnished wood mingled in a comforting stillness. And there he uncovered a ledger belonging to a photographer named March, whose name appeared nowhere in the official records of the newspaper, but whose handwriting filled page after page with observations that felt less like journal entries and more like quiet prophecies. For she wrote of dreams in which the streets emptied overnight and bread lines wound like rivers through neighborhoods that had once echoed with laughter. She described a market floor where papers fluttered to the ground like fallen leaves, and men stared upward, as if searching for the sun through the high glass ceiling. And she spoke of an ancient story passed down by her mother about images that could hold not only the present moment, but the memory of what the land itself had witnessed across centuries, suggesting that the earth beneath the city retained echoes of earlier collapses, when forgotten civilizations had risen in confidence only to vanish beneath the weight of their own abundance. And Samuel began to wonder if his camera had somehow captured those echoes, drawing them forward through time, so that the photograph became a convergence of past and future, where the coming hardship left its imprint upon a day that still believed itself secure. And in the final pages of the ledger, he found a reference to a second photograph taken on the same afternoon, yet never published because had feared what it revealed. And after weeks of searching, he discovered the image hidden within the false back of an old filing cabinet where it had rested in darkness for nearly a century. And when he brought it into the light, he saw the same street now transformed by a subtle but unmistakable shift. As the shop windows appeared empty, the automobiles reduced to skeletal frames, and the line of men stretching farther still, until it disappeared into a haze that seemed to swallow the very edges of the world. And though the date remained unchanged, the scene bore all the hallmarks of the suffering that would follow the market's collapse, with children standing barefoot beside mothers who clutched ration cards and men gazing into the distance with the hollow patience of those who had learned to wait for nothing. And in the upper corner of the image, where the sky should have been clear, there hung a faint spiral of light reminiscent of the dust storms that would later sweep across the plains, carrying with them the topsoil of a nation's hope. And Samuel realized with a calm that surprised him that had not merely foreseen the Great Depression, but had documented its presence before it arrived, as though the future had brushed against the present long enough for her lens to notice. And as he prepared the photographs for exhibition, he felt the weight of their quiet warning settling gently upon his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a reminder that history often speaks in whispers long before it shouts. And on the evening before the gallery opened, he returned to the archive one last time, where the ticking clock continued its patient vigil. And he imagined the people in the photograph finding their way through the coming years, guided, perhaps, by some instinct that prosperity is always a passing season. And when the exhibition finally welcomed its visitors, they moved slowly past the images, their footsteps hushed, as though they too sensed the stillness of a moment suspended between certainty and collapse. And in the soft lamplight, Samuel thought of standing at her camera, listening to the wind thread through the buildings of a thriving city, while somewhere beyond the reach of sight, the first tremors of hardship began their silent advance. And as the night deepened and the last guest departed, he closed the gallery doors with the gentle understanding that the photograph had done what it was meant to do, not by preventing the future, but by reminding those who looked upon it that even in times of abundance, the shadows of what may come are already taking shape, waiting patiently for someone willing to see them. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you, and see you again.